Hey everybody, Mr. Grove here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about cell reproduction and then karyotypes. So up to this point, when a cell wants to reproduce itself, it went through the cell cycle and mitosis. And so like a red blood cell, whenever it would reproduce another red blood cell, both of those would be genetically identical to each other. Same thing with the skin cell, and you can see skin cells are a little bit different than what the red blood cells would be. And again, same story, they would be genetically identical to each other as they went through mitosis. Muscle cells aren't going to reproduce near as often as skin cells or red blood cells, but the same story, they're going to be genetically identical to each other. So the genetic blueprint, all 46 of your chromosomes, all 46 molecules of your DNA will be in each of those cells. And those types of cells are called somatic cells. And so we highlighted these three, but the reality is every cell in your body, with the exception of your reproductive cells, are going to be somatic cells. And so for them to reproduce each other, they would go through mitosis like what we talked about previously. But we're going to focus on the gametes, or the reproductive cells. And so reproductive cells are only going to have 23 chromosomes rather than 46. And that's important because then when a sperm and an egg unite in fertilization, 23 plus 23 will make 46. And so we'll have the right number of chromosomes. And so that's sperm will be the gamete produced by guys, and then eggs will be the gametes produced by the ladies. And so this is for use in sexual reproduction. And so as we previously talked about, asexual reproduction was when one parent can produce one offspring. And that is real handy and real convenient for speed and for not having to find a mate. But the downside of asexual reproduction is we do not have any genetic variety. And so the offspring would be genetically identical to the parent. Sexual reproduction, however, is a different story. It's very difficult to attract a mate. In class, we talked about all the things a white-tailed deer has to go through, making the scrapes, the urination with the hormones onto the scrapes, and then find each other, and all this while you're trying not to be hunted by orange hunters in the woods. So hard to attract a mate. But the upside is well worth it because we have genetic variety. And so that genetic variety allows a species a little bit of protection against some sort of disease or some sort of environmental factor that could wipe out a certain genotype, and if everybody's the same, then it would wipe out the entire species. Over on the side here, we have an actual picture of an egg and then the sperm that are trying to fertilize it. And so in class we pointed out just a size discrepancy. So the egg is way, way, way bigger, almost 2,000 times bigger than the sperm. Which should make sense because all of the nutrients for the zygote, once it's been fertilized, are contained in the egg. Also, then we have number-wise, there are so many more sperm than the egg here. And so, we pointed out that, guys will produce, millions and millions and millions of sperm all throughout their life, up and through the end of their life. Whereas ladies, you are born with the maximum amount of eggs you will ever have. And in fact, just the opposite, rather than producing more throughout your lifetime, the eggs that you do have become less and less viable to the point where really at childbearing age, you're down into just hundreds or maybe a few thousand viable eggs. But that's still plenty for fertilization and reproduction. But unlike guys that are producing all throughout the life, the ladies are limited on the amount that they have. So moving on, another terminology thing is homologous chromosomes. So when we have chromosome pairs, and you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and so those pairs are matched up. So the chromosome number 1 from dad and chromosome number 1 from mom. Now, they have the same gene, even though those genes might be a little different, but those same genes would be on those chromosomes. So if that was the height gene on number 1 here, then from mom, it would be the height gene on number 1 here. Now, mom might give you short, dad might give you tall, but it would still be the height. And so chromosomes that have the same genetic content and are the same size and the same shape are what we call homologous chromosomes. And so you have 46, 23 pairs, and you've got 23 of those came from mom, and 23 of those came from dad. And then later, when we talk about Mendel, we'll understand which ones get activated. So you've got a height gene from mom and from dad, but you're only going to use one of those. So when we have a cell that has a complete double set of chromosomes, we call that a diploid cell. So in the case of your skin cells, red blood cell, muscle cell, those would all be diploid cells. Sperm and egg, those are what we call haploid cells, and they contain half the number of chromosomes, and that's kind of how you can remember that. Half kind of sounds like haploid. Abbreviation-wise, we usually, for some reason, call diploid 2N, and then haploid a single N is just kind of the standard way of denoting that. You have a lot of chromosomes, but you do not have the most chromosomes of species. So as we see here, your dog at home probably has more chromosomes than you. An adder's tongue fern has, a way more chromosomes than you. However, you do have the most genes. So your chromosomes have lots and lots and lots of genes on them. And so something like this adder's tongue fern, while it may have more chromosomes, it doesn't have as many genes per chromosome as what you, a human, would have. Another terminology thing is a zygote. So once we have that fertilized egg, so that sperm has now fertilized the egg, and that first diploid cell is now what we call a zygote. And then it would undergo mitosis and start to divide 1 into 2, 2 into 4, et cetera, until, at the time of birth, around 8 pounds of cells, and then at the time you are, around adult pounds of cells. So that's some more terminology there. Another thing of terminology is autosomes versus sex chromosomes. So autosomes are going to be pairs 1 through 22. And they are the homologous chromosomes, so that's kind of the matching pair. So we've got eye color, hair color, hair texture. So the same genes on each chromosome. And so those would be autosomes. Then the 23rd pair, that's going to be the sex chromosome, and that's always kind of denoted down here at the bottom on a karyotype. And so autosomes, pairs 1 through 22, sex chromosome, are going to be pair 23. This picture of the chromosomes is what we would call a karyotype. And so karyotypes do not come out like this. I mean, we don't take a selfie of a cell and get this nice organized pattern of chromosomes. So what we have to do is we have to get a sample of cells. Usually these are prenatal, so something like an amniocentesis or a CVS here. We'll get cells, we'll culture those till we have enough cells that we can get a karyotype. Then we will stain the cells with some sort of kind of dye, and that will kind of cause the chromosomes to have these little striped banding patterns. And then we have to computerize, match them up. So we try and match them up based on the stripes and then based on the size of the chromosome. And so they're all in a giant pile, and then one by one we sort them out. And on a karyotype, we typically, the number 1 pair is always the biggest pair, and then we work our way down to the 22nd pair, which is always the shortest pair. And that's just typically how karyotypes are portrayed. Then the sex chromosome will always be then on the bottom right. Okay, and so these are homologous chromosomes, 1 through 22, and then our sex chromosome. So for determining sex or gender, XY is going to be male, and then XX would be female. And so the Y chromosome here that denotes male, that is going to have a completely different set of genes as what the X would have, and so those would be non-homologous chromosomes. If we have a female, XX, so then that would be the same, and in some ways that would be considered homologous chromosomes. So that's karyotypes. We'll talk more in a couple slides here, but let's focus on how did we get the cells. The most common way is what's called an amniocentesis. So I've included a video on the link here that will kind of show you an amniocentesis. And so basically a large syringe is used to remove the amniotic fluid. So we're piercing the amniotic sac. There's always a risk involved, and this is usually at an early stage. So if we were to go into miscarriage, it would be very serious for the baby. And so there's about a 1% miscarriage chance. So this is not something we're going to do just to like find the gender or something silly like that. It's usually an amniocentesis is done if there's a serious concern to the baby genetically or developmentally. And so once we've obtained that amniotic fluid, then we'll start to culture those cells until we get enough of them that we could get chromosomes. Then we'll go through the staining process and then organize them out into our karyotype. CVS is another way. It's even a little bit more serious, so 2% miscarriage. And so we're going to use placental tissue rather than amniotic fluid. The idea with the placental tissue is we've got enough cells already, and so we can get our karyotype made a little bit quicker without having to take time to culture the cells. But either way is a pretty risky thing, and so unless there's a strong concern, a physician's probably not going to have one of these done. But if we do, we'll get a karyotype, and then that karyotype will help us with a chromosome abnormality possibility, in addition to telling us the gender. So let's take a look at just a couple karyotypes and make sure that we understand what it is we're looking at here. So in this particular one, would this be a boy or a girl? Well, we would go down to the sex chromosome, and we would see that our sex chromosome is XX, and so this would be a girl. The other thing we're looking at is chromosome abnormalities based on number. Okay, and so if we have more than 2, then that is potentially very, very serious and most likely going to be fatal to the baby. And so in this case, we have pairs on all of this, so this would be considered what we would consider kind of a normal organism, a normal baby. So the most common abnormality is going to be Down syndrome. And so Down syndrome is what we call trisomy 21. So on the 21st pair here, you can see there's 3 chromosomes rather than 2. And so Down syndrome it has common kind of physiological characteristics. So you can see similarities in the eyes and nose. Mental cognitive ability ranges, from normal or close to normal down to delayed. And so a lot of people with Down syndrome can function somewhat on their own, but they may need a little bit of help, balancing a checkbook, or getting to and from work, driving a car, probably, not as likely. But then again, on the other range of that, there can be a little bit more severe possibilities. But the reason we give Down syndrome so much credit or so much airtime is the fact that it's one of the very few chromosome abnormalities that is even survivable. If we have a trisomy 1, trisomy 3, trisomy 5, those are all fatal. In fact, there's really just a handful of chromosome number abnormalities that are even survivable, and Down syndrome is definitely the most common. It's not guaranteed to be linked to the age of the mother, but it is definitely connected. So as mom gets a little bit older when she has the baby, the likelihood of Down syndrome becomes more possibility. And we don't 100% know why, but remember, those eggs are becoming less and less viable every day that goes by, unlike the guy that was making new sperm all throughout his life. So once she starts hitting a certain age, then it's not a linear progression, it becomes exponential for the possibilities of Down syndrome. And so that is trisomy 21. So let's take a look at a couple more karyotypes here. So in this case, would we have Down syndrome or not? We'd go down to 21, just 2 chromosomes, so no Down syndrome. And then would we be a boy or a girl? So in this case, we are XY, and so this would be a female. I'm sorry, would be a male. XX would be a female. So boy, and then no Down syndrome. Let's try one more. So in this case, boy or girl. So here we are XX, and then Down syndrome or not. So find 21, and we have 3 chromosomes, and so this would be Down syndrome. And this would be every cell in their body, whether it's a red blood cell, whether it's a skin cell, whether it's a muscle cell, would all have these 3 chromosomes then. Okay, and so that is karyotypes, chromosome abnormalities, and a little bit about sexual reproduction. And I hope that was helpful.